you need to be ready to respond to contact from RACs, whether it be a recoupment letter, a document request, or if you get a related letter from a third party who's coming back after you for money they had to pay back. First, I want to talk about a document request. Remember, if you receive a document request from a recovery audit contract, you have 45 days to respond. The request is going to tell you why they are asking for that documentation. So you're going to, or at that point, you're going to begin to understand why you're being audited. And as you're making copies of stuff to send to the recovery audit contractor, you should be making additional copies for yourself so you can start taking a look and getting ready for how are we going to respond if we get a recoupment request. You need to have a clear process in place to respond to a request, including somebody who's responsible for making sure it happens because of that tight time frame. And that process should include, at some point during the 45 days, if we become certain we're not going to be able to respond and get this stuff out the door to the RAC within 45 days, that we are getting out a request for an extension. And that request for an extension is being sent in such a way that we have proof of delivery. I'm a big fan of overnight, so it gets there the next day, so we can prove later, hey, we requested the extension, you received the extension request, and here's who received it. Because if you send it and it never gets there, you may have problems. And if you can't prove that you sent it, you're going to have a hard time convincing an ALJ to give you another chance. Like I said, all document requests should be in writing. And something else to remember here with the 45 days. If you don't timely respond to a documentation request, it's the same as not having the documentation. And if you go to the middle slide here on page 24, in the demonstration project, 8% of recoveries were due to insufficient documentation. And in many of those 8%, it wasn't that the documentation was presented, it didn't meet standards. It was that there was no documentation presented. It was just due to a failure to respond in a timely fashion to the request for documentation from the RAC. You should never pay back money to the government because you weren't able to timely respond, especially in a situation where you have 45 days and a chance to ask for an extension. Generally what that means, if you're not getting the documentation out in time, is that you don't have a process in place and it got lost in the shuffle. And I've had cases like that where a client comes to me with 3 days before a deadline or something because it got lost. You really want to make sure you have the process in place now to avoid that, lest you find yourself making a payback